Tennessee, where the 3rd District Chancery Court has 15 days to determine if a restraining order to stop a merger between Forward Air and Omni Logistics should remain. Todd Maiden, our finance editor, is with us to explain this story. Todd, this has got a lot of odds and ends to it, but essentially what has happened just recently in terms of this merger that obviously has some hiccups to get through it if it's going to go through completely.
Right. So the merger was, there was a lot of pushback when it was initially announced among Ford's shareholders and customers. Most recently, like you said yesterday, there was an extension to the temporary restraining order blocking the deal for another 15 days. The court's going to decide whether or not to issue a temporary injunction, which gives a little bit more of a permanent injunctive relief while the court decides whether or not shareholders are due a vote. That was kind of the big catching point out of the gate, is that shareholders didn't get to voice their opinion or their thoughts on a merger that was this size. So that's kind of where we are right now.
So, Todd, one of those catch points, as you mentioned, for shareholders is the fact that the acquisition would come at a pretty hefty price for Forward. You're looking at a pretty expensive price for the shares of Omni and also a really extensive debt load that Forward would assume. Are those kind of the main problems that shareholders see with this, besides the fact that they just didn't get a say at all in the decision?
Yeah, I think the initial reaction was certainly, it's a change, of course, for the business. So Forward Air was kind of known as the line haul capacity provider to the freight forwarding community. And now by taking on one of its customers, Omni Logistics, which is a freight forwarder, that kind of pits it in a position where, Omni currently competes against Ford's other customers. And now Ford's going to have those assets, Omni's going to have those assets at its disposal, probably a better, pencil when it comes to sharpened pencil when it comes to pricing, dibs on capacity when the market tightens, that sort of thing. So that kind of spooked Ford's customers that they're going to be competing now against an incumbent forwarder that's going to be competing from a much stronger position. But yeah, to your point, it was a $3.2 billion original price tag. It's down to $2.7 billion, and that's because Ford shares have sold off 34% through yesterday since the deal was announced. And the share count's fixed on the deal. It's not tethered to a specific share price. So, the deal price will fluctuate, based on where Ford's stock shakes out at the time of the closing. But yeah, high debt load, $1.4 billion in net debt. It'll push Ford's leverage to about 4 times EBITDA at closing for a company that's always been, around that 1.5 mark. And really under 2 is healthy for a growth-oriented company. So Ford has said that they'll get it under 2 within 2 years. But, I think there are just a lot of items here. And I think shareholders kind of said their last-ditch effort was, look, we're going to just fight the way the interpretation Ford has interpreted the law on whether or not a vote is due, and that's where really the courtroom wrangling is kind of occurring now.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. There's a lot of interesting arguments about this, and the fact that the shareholders are basically saying, that Forward Air is kind of ducking Tennessee law to try and get through this, and I don't know if you know exactly if they have a case here or not, but obviously also Forward Air has said they're obviously at some detriment as well for the amount of money they're losing out of this on a daily and if not monthly basis, again, leading up to later on this month where certain fees they're going to be incurred on the deal.
Yeah, so you're right. The plaintiffs, their interpretation of Tennessee law is the deal is structured in a series of transactions, one of which includes the transfer of all of Ford's assets to a limited liability corporation. They're saying, plaintiffs are saying that Ford will only be a part owner in that LLC, and Omni will be a part owner. And if that's the case, then that requires a shareholder vote under Tennessee law. They also have taken issue with the fact that the deal is more than 20% dilutive to existing shareholders, which they also say requires a vote under Tennessee law. Ford's saying that the vote isn't required because at no point will those assets that are being transferred not be 100% in their control. And then they push back. This is kind of where I think the circumvent term is kind of popped up a lot around this deal structure. In total, the deal is 38% diluted to shareholders, but the way the deal structure is set up, it avoids that 20% threshold because at closing, only 16.5% of the equity is allocated to shareholder, to Omni's stakeholders. And then there's another 21% that will come in these non-voting preferred shares, which, that gets around that threshold. But then, and the reason is because Ford's existing shareholders have the right to vote on whether or not to convert those non-voting shares into voting common stock. So that's where Ford's saying, you do have a say in this. But the plaintiffs have said, look, the shareholders have said, this isn't, it's kind of a false choice. We either vote yes to convert that stock or we pay. Those shares come with a very steep dividend, 13% dividend on the preferred shares if they don't agree to convert the stock to voting shares. So that's kind of, I think, one of the biggest sticking points legally on the deal.
So, then, of course, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned the fees. You're right. The clock's ticking there. Real quick, I think there was a filing yesterday or the day before that showed Ford's paying. They have to issue. It's like $1.85 billion in debt to get the deal, to fund the deal, and they thought that this deal there wouldn't be any pushback. They didn't expect a temporary restraining order. They closed on those financing terms on October 2nd. Then they get this temporary restraining order. So the clock's actually ticking on that interest accruing, and it's, one tranche of it is $70,000 a day, and then there's another one that could be in excess of $300,000 a day later. It starts at the end of this month, and then it ramps up heavily a month from then. So the longer this goes on, certainly the more they're going to be paying in interest daily.
So, Todd, as we mentioned, that 15-day now extension to the restraining order, is that when the next hearing will be, or does that happen somewhere in between?
It could. The filing said up to another 15 days. So I guess all temporary restraining orders, or most, are for a 15-day period. It sounds like the chancellor, not a judge in a chancery court, but the chancellor will issue a written opinion. It sounds like it's going to be in the next few days. I think they know, the court knows that the longer this gets held up, it's not just the accruing interest, it's the doubt and uncertainty. Ford and Omni have said that it's hurting, it's resulting in a loss of business. Employees are concerned about it. I think holding it up helps no one. If an injunction is granted, then you could probably have a court case as soon as, sometime in November, probably early November. I think the plaintiffs said in a filing, within 4 to 6 weeks, they could be ready to go to court on this. So I think you could get discovery, whatever isn't known, because the way this deal was done, it didn't require a shareholder vote. There was no proxy, so a lot of the details that you normally get in a merger of this size haven't been provided. So there will be some discovery and certainly sharing of information between the two parties before it hits a courtroom.
As mergers and acquisition season is still going on, this one certainly seems to be taking the cake in terms of the headlines that it's generating. Todd, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.